All right, good afternoon. My name is Bill Moten, and I'm the Vice President of Solution Development at Tesco Technologies. My job is to ensure that Tesco has that absolute complete offer to make the solutions that our customers need. And we partner with key vendors like Commscope, and you'll hear more about their product here in just a minute. But one thing that Tesco does is that we will help you design, configure, and order what you need to complete your wireless solutions. So I'm pleased to introduce Philip Sorrells. Philip is Vice President of Strategic Marketing for Commscope, a global leader in infrastructure solutions for communication networks. Philip is responsible for marketing strategy, leading key trends to the industry into marketing strategies for telecom networks. Philip has over 20 years of experience in the telecom industry with Allen Telecom, Andrew Corporation, and Commscope. And before that, he spent 10 years with Texas Instruments. He has led the wireless industry in adopting many antenna systems, innovations, and actually has 3 patents to his name for antenna systems. Philip holds a Bachelor's of Science degree in engineering from Texas Tech University. So Philip is presenting the last great frontier of wireless. And this is a really great topic because I think more and more we expect wireless to work everywhere and anywhere. It is truly going to be that next utility. Like we expect to have electricity, we expect to have water, we expect to have wireless coverage in our facility. And so Philip is going to talk about what that means and how Commscope is helping us achieve that. So Philip, it's all yours.
All right. Thanks. All right, let's see if I can get settled into this. Wow, that's a good mic. I think everybody can hear me okay now. Kind of lean into it. So I'm Philip Sorrells, and thank you very much to our friends at Tesco. If you haven't been to the Tesco area, it's right down the hall. I would highly encourage you to go meet the folks at Tesco, get to know them. They're great helpers in almost anything that they do. We've been working with them for years and years and years. Fantastic people. So besides the nice things that Bill had to say about me, there's a couple other things that I think you might find interesting about me. If you, any of you use Twitter, any Twitter hounds out there? So you should look me up and follow me on Twitter, but you'll see on my Twitter account that I have 3 things that I think are interesting about me. One, I believe that I'm addicted to finding fracture points. So I always am looking for changes in technology, changes in regulatory conditions, and changes in commercial relationships in the industry that can fundamentally change the way the whole market works. And I think we've seen a lot of examples of fracture points in the past 10 years. Technology, LTE, anybody hear of it? LTE is a huge technology fracture point. We have changes that are coming out from the FCC. We talked even today about new frequency bands that are being pushed out into the market. That's part of a regulatory fracture point. All very important things. So the second thing about me that you might find interesting is that I like to consider myself a storyteller. In fact, one of the very first things that I did as a young kid is entered into and actually won competitions on telling stories. And no matter where I am, I like to be around good friends and family and tell a good story, spin a yarn, have maybe, if possible, something that people can learn from that. And I hope you learn something from the story I'm going to tell today. And kind of the last thing about me is that I'm a proud techie nerd. Any other proud techie nerds in the audience today? Yeah, we love our nerds. Everybody needs a good nerd on their team. So, and I am. I get lost in my technology, and I've had my wife at many pool parties and other things say, hey, Philip, it's time to knock off the techno garbage and talk in English, really just settle it out. So I'm hoping that today the combination of fracture points and storytelling and a little bit of techno geek will help you relate a little bit better to my story today about the next frontier. We as humans have evolved over tens of thousands of years, and most of in the history of mankind, we started off as hunters and gatherers. And then eventually we evolved our societies to more of an agricultural society. And then we had the evolution of the Industrial Revolution, and we started to let machines do the work instead of us. And then eventually we've come to the age of information, bringing some level of intelligence to the machineries that help us do our work. And then we had the age of information and the age of the internet. And I would think that most of us today believe that we're still in the age of the internet. Does anybody believe that we are in the age of the internet now? Yeah. But now I honestly think that we're no longer in the age of the internet. I think we're today in the age of mobility. And there's actually a name for this generation. It's called Generation M, Generation Mobility. You know, if you notice the gray hair on my head, you can probably guess that I have children who in their 20s. My children are part of the Generation Mobility. And that generation has some very common characteristics. About 26% of them claim that they do most of their work from their mobile device or their tablet, which I find to be really interesting. I try to do an occasional email from my mobile device, but that's about the extent of it. But I can tell you my son, who's 26, he works his tablet, he works his mobile phone. He can do anything for his job that he needs to from that tablet. Then the other interesting thing, other than just doing their normal work from a mobile device, there's this thing called shadow tasking, and something I'd never heard of until I read this article. But shadow tasking is the phenomenon where, and I'm sure that some of you have done this, you'll be in a social setting like a party or at church or at some social event, and you get a little buzz on your mobile device and it's a work-related thing. So you open up the app and you clear out whatever that work-related thing is. Well, about 64% of Generation Mobile people claim that they'll do a little business while they're on their personal time. And correspondingly, about 82% of Generation Mobile will claim that while they're at work, they'll take a little bit of time to update their social calendar even though they're on the job. Now that might sound bad, but actually as an employer, I think it's kind of good, because if my employees can stay at work and arrange their doctor's appointment or electronically deposit a check or do all those things, then guess what? They're actually spending more time at work with us. So this Generation Mobile is really a fascinating part, I think, of the next kind of wave of what the human society and the human culture is going to be like. And I think it's going to have a really amazing ramifications on how the technology has to evolve. And not just the technologies, but all the ecosystems that go along with those technologies. So one critical thing about all of that is that if you have a mobile device or a tablet or anything, all the information in your business runs on that network. It doesn't matter what kind it is, that network becomes an essential part of your ecosystem. And we think it's important that any part of that has to have 4 key characteristics. One, that network has to be very, very efficient, right? Because time is money, money is time. So whatever the network is, it needs to be highly efficient. It has to be always on. I mean, my son, again, I'll use him as an example. He's 26. He's probably had 7 different mobile devices. Anytime there's a quality problem with any of his subscriptions, he dumps them just like that. There's absolutely zero loyalty in Generation Mobile. So it has to be on all the time, has to work every time. It needs to be agile. It needs to be able to respond to conditions in the environment. And last but not least, it needs to be future ready. I mean, I see a few of you that look like you may have come to these conferences in the past. We were talking earlier about, Bill and I were talking about some of the first things that we did. We remember when the big buzz at these shows was PCS at 1900 megahertz. And I remember when trunking and paging was the next technology. But now we're talking about 5G, and we'll be talking about 6G by the end of 2030. So that we always have to be ready for the future. So I do believe that the final frontier for wireless is really the enterprise building space, right? So if you go to a big stadium, if you go to a big airport, you'll have a pretty good experience with your mobile device and with Wi-Fi. But when you go into an enterprise class facility, a bank, 5, 10, 15 stories, that type of ecosystem, you'll find a lot of Wi-Fi and you won't find a lot of mobility. So I really think it's the final frontier, and one that we believe there's a lot of technology investment and overall investment in the future. Here's 4 or 5 key statistics that are important. The first one is 1.5. I hope that some of you in the audience have heard of Cooper's Law. Cooper's Law basically says that for any specific geographical area, the rate of consumption of data and voice traffic in that specific area will increase by a factor of 1.5 every 30 months. That's Cooper's Law. There's another law I'll tell you about some other time if you have time, Shannon's Law. I've got some followers who love to hear about that. But that's the first key statistic, 1.5, rate of data throughput capacity demand that's gross. The second one is 80%, and that's pretty common sense. Most of the time when you use your tablet or your mobile device, you're inside the building. I mean, hopefully you're not driving down the highway, at least when I'm on the highway, doing a lot of downloads of your YouTube video. Please, not while you're driving. But most of that happens actually inside building. And here's the interesting thing about that. Only 2% of the 30 billion square meters of commercial real estate are fully equipped to supply mobility, LTE or 3G. 2%, 30 billion square feet. But on the flip side, about 95% of that space has a Wi-Fi experience. So the question is, why do we not have a mobility experience integrated into those enterprise space? What are the obstacles, and what do we as an industry need to do to overcome those obstacles to make that experience useful even in those locations? So my catchphrase here is it's really time for us to consider mobility as the next utility. It should be thought at the beginning of when the design of a new building or a new enterprise location is considered, from the very beginning. One of the first things that it should go in the architectural drawings. Why is that? Mobile quality and availability is essential. I'm sure that none of you have ever had to walk outside of your building, wherever you work. You had to walk outside to get a mobile signal. Does that ever happen? Yeah, it happens in my building occasionally, and believe me, we complain about it all the time. But you've got to have mobile quality, and availability is essential. If you're an investor in a very expensive piece of real estate, and your users have to leave your building to use their mobile phone, the value of your property is definitely diminishing. The second thing is that users expect a ubiquitous experience, anywhere, anytime, no matter what the application is, both with mobility and Wi-Fi. But here's a question I want to see if you can give me a little help with. When you came into this room with all these users, did you turn your Wi-Fi off or turn your Wi-Fi on? Anybody? A lot of people, including me, when I go into a very crowded, closed space, and I have an option between my LTE signal and my Wi-Fi signal, I'll turn off my Wi-Fi. Why? Because it's congested. Everybody wants free. I need fast in my job. I need a fast signal. So users expect a ubiquitous experience no matter what the technology is. The next key thing is a trend toward bring your own device. So many businesses now provide a bring your own device service, and that's fantastic. It really helps the employees, it helps the business. There's tons of studies that have been done that shows there's a lot of money to be saved with that technology. So it's really helpful technology to both the building owners and to the employees, but it implies more or less that if you're the building owner, you pretty much need to provide service capability for more than one operator, right? Unless you want to dictate to your employees what subscription plan they have to have, and that's not really bring your own device. A fourth area is security and public safety. Now today, I think we all know that in the outside mobile world, we have geolocation requirements that are really mandated by the Fed. And today, that's not really a mandate in enterprise type space, but it could be. But there's other reasons why security and public safety is really supported in these type of enterprise applications with both a Wi-Fi and mobile activity. So what are the challenges? I would say that there's a few really key challenges. The biggest one is inside enterprise locations, depending on the kind of glass you have or the kind of walls, it can be really hard to get coverage inside the building. So that's certainly one reason. The other reason is capacity and how to scale the capacity. It's very difficult today for anybody, including the major operators, to predict how much capacity they'll need, because every time we think we know how much capacity we're going to need, Samsung or Apple comes out with a new device that launches all kinds of new applications that consume even more bandwidth. So how to keep up with capacity is a very challenging thing. And the last thing is interference. How do you manage interference in the RF environment? The second thing is that traditional mobile systems are a little bit complex. So, you know, they take a little bit of a cellular expert. If you go into an enterprise building, the technologist in there is typically the IT guy. And they're not necessarily RF guys. They don't know a lot about RF. They know a lot about IT. Well, you don't want to necessarily have a requirement to have a really highly complex RF engineer on your staff along with your IT guys. So that's an issue. They can be a little bit complex, a lot of different wiring, a lot of coax. And last, they take some fairly significant amount of physical labor to do installations. I think the biggest issue that most enterprise building owners have is a little bit of inaction due to fear. And the big fear is whatever I buy today probably will be obsolete in a year. And I don't want to have to rip and replace. I'll just wait until the technologists decide what's really going to be the right answer. So there's a lot of sitting on their hands, waiting for the technology to settle down to avoid this whole issue of possibly investing in a certain type of technology only to find out, 2 years later that you got to rip it and replace it. So our approach to this is really to take a platform approach, take a kind of a scalable platform approach. I think the first key thing is that for at least the next 5 to 10 years, Wi-Fi and mobility will exist together. So it's important to figure out how to plan it together, to do the engineering of both the Wi-Fi and the mobility access points, cabling, infrastructure, management overlayer, do that simultaneously as much as possible. And fortunately, there's now standards out there, CTIA, ISO standards that help lay out grid schedules and plans for things like access points. The next area is planning beyond the desk. Inside a building, most of the traditional IT functions happen at the desk. Well, the reality is that most of those future IT functions, especially in a wireless world, will move up into the ceiling. We'll see access points at the ceiling. We'll see cabling, structured cabling in the ceiling grids. All that type of stuff will move from your desk level type application to a ceiling application. Which leads us to a concept that we like to promote that we call the universal connectivity grid. And again, this is a concept of taking the right kind of design for a Wi-Fi access points, the right design for mobility access points, and designing not only where to put the access points, but how to feed them with power, with backhaul, and all the other applications that need to happen inside that ceiling. One key part of that solution is structured cable. How do you select the right kind of structured cable with the right kind of bandwidth and right kind of power over Ethernet capability to be able to feed all those different devices that are in the ceiling? A new platform that we're introducing is ION-E. ION-E is a unified wireless infrastructure. And we have intentionally tried to design this infrastructure to be friendly to a typical IT engineer. Not a typical RF engineer, but a typical IT engineer. Easy to install. It plans just like Wi-Fi, and it's powered over Ethernet. And most importantly, there's no complex RF involved. In fact, there's no coax cable that go in the horizontal runs. We think there's 3 key values that make this really easy to use in an IT type application. One, it's frequency agnostic. The access point covers 380 to 2.7 gigahertz. So the IT person doesn't really have to worry about which frequency bands go to which node. This device auto recognizes the frequency band that's coming from the radio and then applies it to the right nodes. It's multi-operator, multi-technology, and again uses standard IT infrastructure. So there's a lot of applications, certainly airports, terminals, telecommunication hubs, large venues. But I just want to wrap up with a little summary here. First off, mobility is really no longer just a nice to have in the building. For a high value building with tenants that have choices where to lease their building space or where to live in their condo, that mobility is a critical decision. I can tell you for sure, when my children, 26-year-olds, look for a condo, if they don't have a mobile signal in that condo, they're not buying. That's for sure. So it's no longer a nice to have, it's really a must have. I believe the smartest thing to do as you plan that facility or plan that enterprise space or location, think about the design of the Wi-Fi and the mobility at the same time. Try to find a common grid, use the concept that we brought forward of a universal connectivity grid, and really integrate that from the very beginning. And then the fortunate thing is that the planning tools are all there to make that much simpler than it was even 2 years ago. So it really is an opportunity to move forward with wireless in enterprise building as the next utility. Okay, so in appreciation for your time and patience listening to my story, I want to offer all of you who are attended today access to our free LTE Best Practices ebook. This is a little book that we put together over the last couple of years that documents a lot of positive, hard-won lessons of how to roll out LTE effectively across networks. It's available on our website for no charge, and I'd welcome any of you to download that and shoot me any questions that you might have later on.